Hello and welcome to Chapter by Chapter ASMR. It's a fairly new channel, so I'm just getting used to some of the audio and uploading things, so it'll be a little rough around the edges, at least for a little while. So if you do have any comments or suggestions, please stick them in the comments and I will take a look. What I'm going to read today is part of Jonathan Livingstone Seagull, a story by Richard Bach. I can't say it's one of my favourite books, but it's one I've kept with me. It's a book my parents had. It's pretty dog-eared and well loved. I've read it a couple of times. It's always worth a read. But I'm going to read part of this. It doesn't really have traditional chapters, it's got parts. So I'll read up to a kind of natural stop a few pages in. So this will be a shortish one. Again, I'd recommend reading it for yourself. It's quite a good visual book as well. You might hear me changing pages or flicking through the pages a few times, because there are lots of photos in them which I can't really get across on the recording. But let's begin. It was morning, and the new sun sparkled gold across the ripples of a gentle sea. A mile from shore, a fishing boat chummed the water, and the word for breakfast flock flashed through the air, till a crowd and 1,000 seagulls came to dodge and fight for bits of food. It was another busy day beginning. But way off alone, out by himself beyond the boat and the shore, Jonathan Livingstone Seagull was practising. 100 feet in the sky, he lowered his webbed feet, lifted his beak, and strained to hold a painful, hard, twisting curve through his wings. The curve meant that he would fly slowly, and now he slowed until the wind was a whisper in his face, until the ocean stood still beneath him. He narrowed his eyes in fierce concentration, held his breath, forced one single more inch of curve. Then his feathers ruffled, he stalled and fell. Seagulls, as you know, never falter, never stall. To stall in the air is for them disgrace, and it is dishonour. But Jonathan's Livingstone Seagull, unashamed, stretching his wings again in that trembling hard curve, slowing, and stalling once more, was no ordinary bird. Most gulls don't bother to learn more than the simplest facts of flight, how to get from shore to food and back again. For most gulls, it's not flying that matters, but eating. For this gull, though, it was not eating that mattered, but flight. More than anything else, Jonathan Livingstone Seagull loved to fly. This kind of thinking, he found, is not the way to make oneself popular with other birds. Even his parents were dismayed, as Jonathan spent whole days alone, making hundreds of low-level glides, experimenting. He didn't know why, for instance, but when he flew at altitudes less than half his wingspan above the water, he could stay in the air longer, with less effort. His glides ended not with the usual feet-down splash into the sea, but with a long, flat wake as he touched the surface with his feet tightly streamlined against his body. When he began sliding into feet-up landings on the beach, and pacing the length of his slide in the sand, his parents were very much dismayed indeed. "Why, John, why?" his mother asked. "Why is it so hard to be like the rest of the flock, John? Why can't you leave low-level flying to the pelicans, the albatross? Why don't you eat? John, you're bone and feathers." "I don't mind being bone and feathers, Mum. I just want to know what I can do in the air and what I can't, and that's all. I just want to know." "See here, Jonathan," said his father, not unkindly. "Winter isn't far away. Boats will be few and the surface fish will be swimming deep. If you must study, then study food and how to get it. This flying business is all very well, but you can't eat a glide, you know. Don't forget that the reason you fly is to eat." Jonathan nodded obediently. For the next few days he tried to behave like the other gulls. He really tried, screeching and fighting with the flocks around the piers and fishing boats, diving on scraps of fish and bread, but he couldn't make it work. It's also pointless, he thought, deliberately dropping a hard-won anchovy to a hungry old gull chasing him. I could be spending all this time learning to fly. There's so much to learn. And it wasn't long before Jonathan Gull was off by himself again, far out to sea. hungry, happy, learning. The subject was speed, and in a week's practice he learned more about the speed than the fastest gull alive. From 1,000 feet, flapping his wings as hard as he could, he pushed over into a blazing steep dive towards the waves, and learned why seagulls don't make blazing steep power dives. In just 6 seconds he was moving 70 miles per hour, a speed at which one's wing goes unstable on the upstroke. Time after time it happened. Careful as he was, working at the very peak of his ability, he lost control at high speed. Climb to 1,000 feet. Full power straight ahead first, then push over flapping to a vertical dive. Then every time his left wing stalled on an upstroke, he'd roll violently left, stall his right wing recovering and flick like fire into a wild, tumbling spin to the right. He couldn't be careful enough on that upstroke. 10 times he tried, and all 10 times as he passed through 70 miles per hour, he burst into a churning mass of feathers, out of control, crashing down into the water. The key, he thought at last, dripping wet, must be to hold the wings still at high speeds, to flap up to 50 and then hold the wings still. From 2,000 feet he tried again, rolling into his dive, beak straight down, wings full out and stable from the moment he passed 50 miles per hour. It took tremendous strength, but it worked. In 10 seconds he'd blurred through 90 miles per hour. Jonathan had set a world speed record for seagulls. But victory was short-lived. The instant he began his pull-out, the instant he changed the angle of his wings, he snapped into the same terrible, uncontrolled disaster. And at 90 miles per hour, it hit him like dynamite. Jonathan Seagull exploded in midair and smashed down into a brick-hard sea. When he came to, it was well after dark, and he floated in moonlight on the surface of the ocean. His wings were ragged bars of lead, but the weight of failure was even heavier on his back. He wished, feebly, that the weight could just be enough to drag him gently down to the bottom and end it all. As he sank lower in the water, a strange hollow voice sounded within him. There's no way around it. I am a seagull. I am limited by my nature. If I went to learn so much about flying, I'd have charts for brains. If I meant to fly at speed, I'd have a falcon's short wings and live on mice instead of fish. My father was right. I must forget this foolishness. I must fly home to the flock and be content as I am, as a poor, limited seagull. The voice faded, and Jonathan agreed. The place for a seagull at night is on shore, and from this moment forth, he vowed, he would be a normal gull. It would make everyone happier. He pushed wearily away from the dark water and flew towards the land, grateful for what he'd learnt about work-saving, low-altitude flying. But no, he thought, I'm done with the way I was. I'm done with everything I learned. I'm a seagull like every other seagull. I will fly like one. So he climbed painfully to 100 feet and flapped his wings harder, pressing for shore. He felt better for his decision to be just another one of the flock. There would be no ties now to the force that had driven him to learn. There would be no more challenge and no more failure. And it was pretty just to stop thinking and fly through the dark towards the lights above the beach. Dark. The hollow voice cracked an alarm. Seagulls never fly in the dark. Jonathan was not alert to listen. It's pretty, he thought, the moon and the light twinkling on the water, throwing out little beacon trails through the night, and also peaceful and still. Get down. Seagulls never fly in the dark. If you were meant to fly in the dark, you'd have eyes of an owl. You'd have charts for brains. You'd have a falcon's short wings. There in the night, 100 feet in the air, Jonathan Livingstone Seagull blinked. His pain, his resolutions vanished. Short wings. A falcon's short wings. That's the answer. What a fool I've been. All I need is a tiny little wing. All I need is to fold most of my wings and fly in just the tips alone. Short wings. He climbed 2,000 feet above the Black Sea, and without a moment for thought or failure and death, he brought his forewings tightly into his body, left only the narrow sweeping vertical daggers of his wingtips extended into the wind, and fell into a vertical dive. The wind was a monster roar at his head, 70 miles per hour, 90, 120, and faster still. The wing strain now at 140 miles per hour wasn't nearly as hard as it had been before at 70. With the faintest twist of his wingtips, he eased out of the dive and shot above the waves, a grey cannonball under the moon. He closed his eyes to slits against the wind and rejoiced. 140 miles per hour, and under control. If I dive from 5,000 feet instead of 2,000, I wonder how fast. His vows of moment before were forgotten, swept away in that great swift wind. Yet he felt guiltless, breaking the promises he made before. Such promises are only for the gills that accept the ordinary. One who has touched excellence in his learning has no need of that kind of promise. By sunup, Jonathan Gull was practising again. From 5,000 feet, the fishing boats were specks into the flat blue water. Breakfast flock was a faint cloud of dust motes, circling. He was alive, trembling ever so slightly with delight, proud that his fear was under control. Then, without ceremony, he hugged in his forewings, extended his short, angled wingtips, and plunged directly towards the sea. By the time he passed 4,000 feet, he'd reached terminal velocity. The wind was a solid beating wall of sound against which he could move no faster. He was flying now straight down at 214 miles per hour. He swallowed, knowing that if his wings unfolded at that speed, he'd be blown into a million tiny shreds of Seagull. But the speed was power, and the speed was joy, and the speed was pure beauty. He began his pull out at 1,000 feet, wings tips thudding and blurring in that gigantic wind. The boat and the crowd of gulls tilting and growing meteor fast directly in his path. He couldn't stop. He didn't know yet even how to turn at that speed. Collision would be instant death. And so he shut his eyes. It happened that morning then, just after sunrise, that Jonathan Livingstone Seagull fired directly through the centre of Breakfast Flock. Ticking off 212 miles per hour, eyes closed at a great roaring shriek of wind and feathers. The Gull of Fortune smiled upon him this once, and no one was killed. By the time he'd pulled his beak straight up into the sky, he was still scorching along at 160 miles per hour. When he had slowed to 20 and stretched his wings again at last, the boat was a crumb on the sea, 4,000 feet below. His thought was triumph. Terminal velocity. A seagull at 214 miles per hour. It was a breakthrough. The greatest single moment in the history of the flock. And in that moment a new age opened for Jonathan Gull. Flying out to his lonely practice area, folding his wings for a dive from 8,000 feet, he set himself at once to discover how to turn. A single wingtip feather he found moved at a fraction of an inch, gives a smooth sweeping curve at tremendous speeds. Before he learned this, however, he found that moving more than one feather at that speed will spin you like a rifle ball, and Jonathan had flown the first aerobatics of any seagull on Earth. He spared no time that day for talk with other gulls, but flew on past sunset. He discovered the loop, the slow roll, the point roll, the inverted spin, the gull bunt, and the pinwheel. When Jonathan Seagull joined the flock on the beach, it was full night. He was dizzy and terribly tired. Yet in delight he flew and looped to landing, with a snap roll just before touching down. When they hear of it, he thought, of the breakthrough, they'll be wild with joy. How much more there is now to living. Instead of our drab slogging forth and back to the fishing boats, there's reason for life. We can lift ourselves out of ignorance. We can find ourselves as creatures of excellence and intelligence and skill. We can be free. We can learn to fly. The years ahead hummed and glowed with promise. The gulls were flocked into the council gathering when he landed, and apparently had been so flocked for some time. They were, in fact, waiting. Jonathan Livingstone Seagull, stand to centre. The elder's words sounded in a voice of highest ceremony. Stand to centre meant only great shame or great honour. Stand to centre for honour was the way the gulls' foremost leaders were marked. Of course, he thought, the breakfast flock this morning saw the breakthrough. But I want no honours. I have no wish to be leader. I only want to share what I have found, to show these horizons out ahead for us all. He stepped forward. Jonathan Livingstone Seagull, said the elder, stand to centre for shame in the sight of your fellow gulls. It felt like being hit with a board. His knees went weak, his feathers sagged, and there was roaring in his ears. Centred for shame? Impossible. The breakthrough? They can't understand. They're wrong. They're wrong. For his reckless irresponsibility, the solemn voice intoned, violating the dignity and tradition of the Gull family. To be scented for shame meant that he would be cast out of Gull society, banished into a solitary life on the far cliffs. One day, Jonathan Livingstone Seagull, you shall learn that irresponsibility does not pay. Life is the unknown and the unknowable, except that we are put into this world to eat, to stay alive as long as we possibly can. The seagull never speaks back to the council flock, but it was Jonathan's voice raised. Irresponsibility? My brothers, he cried. Who is more responsible than a gull who finds and follows a meaning, a higher purpose for life? For 1,000 years we have scrabbled after fish heads, but now we have a reason to live, to learn, to discover, to be free. Give me one chance, let me show ye what I have found. The flock might as well have been stern. The brotherhood is broken, the gulls in turn together. With one accord, they solemnly closed their ears and turned their backs upon him. And I'll make a stop there. Thanks for listening. It does get better in that story, I promise. Any comments, any suggestions, let me know. I hope you enjoyed. And apologies for any stormy winds you can hear in the background.